Hi everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to our second series of a HR Leader Series 2023. I'd like to introduce for this afternoon session, firstly, Helen Flynn will be walking through with us on the topic of security of critical infrastructure, which is probably on everyone's mind, especially with the recent launch in Australia. And adding on, we also have our CEO of Avvanz, Kanan Chetia, who will be also speaking specifically on the topic of risk from the element of from the angle of the people. So without further ado, I would like to hand this off to Helen, who will take us off. And again, please feel free to add any questions or any comments you'd like to have in the Q&A section, and we'll try our level best to answer all of them. Thanks again. Helen, please.
Thanks very much, Xiang. Welcome everyone, and thank you very much for having me here to talk through security of critical infrastructure. So I guess the first question is who should be interested in the security of critical infrastructure? So obviously everyone has some interest in managing their infrastructure, whether it's critical or not, making sure it's secure, making sure your businesses operate when and how they should when you need them to. So there's a piece of legislation that I'll run through shortly that is all around the security of critical infrastructure, and it specifically defines then what Australia believes and the government believes is critical infrastructure for keeping our community operating. I think this was really evident during the COVID shutdowns, where we learned what was particularly important to us around making sure food and groceries were available, our access to healthcare, how important it was that we had access to financial services, education, all of the things that are up on the screen at the moment, we realised are really critical for making sure that the community operates as it should. So this wasn't in response to COVID, but it was just highlighted as being more important during COVID times. So what the government has done has been to develop this Security of Critical Infrastructure Act. So the government spent a lot of time engaging with industry to talk through what was important in terms of what was critical infrastructure, and what were the things that were important in making sure that it functions and operates when and how we want it to. Particularly, it focuses on any sort of threat actors that are wanting to disrupt that as well. So this is how the structure of the Security of Critical Infrastructure, or the SOCI Act, is put together. And so at the top, we've got the overarching act. The key things about that act are that it gave the government, or has given the government, a mandate and powers to then ask questions about critical infrastructure, set up a register of what critical infrastructure is, and then gave it powers to then look at other notification requirements and put in place other requirements for managing risk for critical infrastructure. So most of what I'm going to be talking about today is then the pieces of legislation that sit underneath that overarching act, which gives the detail of what other critical infrastructure participants need to do. So to expand on the list that I had on the previous slide, in the rules, there's definition rules, which is the first piece of pertinent, I guess, legislation that sits underneath the act. If you want to know what is included in critical infrastructure in that definition, then you can look to those rules for your industry sector. It gives a lot of detail around what is and what isn't critical infrastructure. Then the other piece of legislation that Xiang alluded to just before is this Critical Infrastructure Risk Management Program rule. So that came in earlier this year in February. And then it required that any critical infrastructure would develop a risk management program by mid-August. So that's just been. And so if you are critical infrastructure, you should have that in place now. If you don't panic. It's never too late. The government has taken a very engaging approach in rolling out this legislation, and it doesn't actually require your board to do anything like an attestation. So they do need to do a report in September next year. So you do have a little bit of time to get that in place for your board or for your organization by September next year before you actually have to report on it. So better late than never. So what the Critical Infrastructure Risk Management Program requires is that you've identified and managed risks associated with cyber and information security, personnel or those insider threats that you may have, your supply chain risk, and physical and natural events. So it's much broader than just cybersecurity. A lot of people that think that SOCI is all about cybersecurity, that is a large component of it, but it's not all of it. It is all about making sure that the infrastructure acts as you want it to, when you want it to. The other thing that it does require is the adoption of a cybersecurity standard, so particularly in that cyberspace. Now, there's certain standards that are more specific to different areas of infrastructure, and so you need to then take some time to look at what is the most appropriate cybersecurity standard for your organization. Before I move on from this piece of legislation, is there any questions? I know I've gone through this pretty quickly. The slide pack will be provided, so you can go into a bit more depth, and like everything, just Google and this all comes up pretty easily and easily digestible for you. No, okay, I will keep going. So I'm just going to run you through now then, and particularly for those who may or may not have started their journey on their critical infrastructure or SOCI program. I'll run you through a case study which actually refers to two clients that I've developed SOCI compliance management system for. So one of them was an electricity generation company. The other was a financial services organization. So the reason why I'm sharing this case study around both of them is that for you to understand that the process is the same regardless of the kind of organization that you are. You can run through this same process, and depending on whether you're small or large, the only difference is how much depth and detail you might go into. But if you haven't started your journey, then hopefully this will help you. So the first thing that I did with both of these organizations was work with their board to set a risk appetite. Now, one of them was really mature and already sort of understood the concept of appetite, and we just built on what they already had. The other was quite immature, and so their board was a little concerned about setting risk appetite when they didn't understand a lot about SOCI or a lot about particularly cybersecurity risks that they were exposed to. Now, what I suggest is you develop your risk appetite in a draft state, and then you keep it in draft until you've gone through and your risk assessments and you've developed the rest of the program, and then you can test if that appetite is still correct for the board and modify it accordingly up or down if required. So it allows you a placeholder and setting a baseline with which to start from. It also helps you start to break down those security silos so that then your board can understand the breadth of dealing with security and what it means to your organization and what it means under legislation, and start to all talk the same language. So that's why I use risk appetite initially. Then I think it's really important to determine what assets or what functions of your organization are critical for operating your business. Because if everything's critical, then kind of by virtue, nothing's critical. So you've got to be really clear with your organization, what are the critical functions that you perform, and so that not everything is classed as critical. That also helps you then develop a bit of a fit for purpose critical infrastructure risk management program for you. Because you don't want to overbake it. You want to make sure that the resources that you have are targeted in the right areas. With both organizations, I also engaged an external provider who was was an expert in cyber threat likelihood. So the reason why I did this is because I've found that many organizations understand what might happen if an external actor gets access to their assets or their functions. So they understand what can happen because they've seen it with other organizations like I'm having a mental blank, but we all know that the large events that we've seen in the cyberspace. So you know what can happen. But a lot of organizations don't actually have the expertise in-house to know what is the actual likelihood for you. So don't be afraid to get really targeted intelligence from those people who make it their job to understand who the threat actors are out there. What I found with both of the organizations that I worked with is it gave them a really clear view of what that landscape was for them, and then also where they needed to target any of their cyber threat activities. Then we ran through the risk assessments. Now, I broke these down into the relevant areas of expertise, depending on the organization. The reason being is that these sorts of programs can have a really big impact on people's time and availability. And we all know that most people don't have time for these things. So by breaking up the risk assessments and not just putting everyone in a room for days on end, we were able to do really targeted risk assessments and understand those relevant areas as we needed to. Then I brought it all together into the one program. And then the last part is developing an emergency response or business continuity plan. Most organizations have something like this, but you often need to either revise it or build from it based on what you now understand of being your critical assets or your critical functions, and then the risks associated with that. And then my last tip is embed it into your business as usual processes. Try really hard, if you can, not to have this as a document that sits to the side or gets put on the shelf, because it won't actually add that value to your organization. And this is a really, really good opportunity to actually build resilience in your organization, regardless of the fact that you might need to be doing this for compliance purposes. So even if you aren't critical infrastructure, this is actually a good task to go through to, as I said, build that resilience. So any questions on that and that sort of case study from a couple of clients that I've worked with? Okay, I'll keep going. So the other concept that's introduced by this piece of legislation is critical workers. Now, as soon as I say that, you probably already have in your mind the sorts of people in your organization who might be critical. The legislation defines them as it says on the screen there, but I guess the key things to think about are who has potentially access to some of those areas, those assets or those functions that are critical for you to conduct your business. And who are those people that are critical for keeping your business operating? So there's kind of two aspects to that. One, the access that people might have over admin access or ability to change things or to access IT or to access key pieces of information. And then the other one is who's critical to kind of keep your operations running. And I challenge people to not just assume that your CEO is critical. Hopefully we don't have too many CEOs in the on the call, because I'm not hacking on CEOs, but I have found with other organizations that periodically there's a change out of executive personnel and the business doesn't fall over. They are critical for making sure that the strategy is enacted and runs well, but not necessarily that day-to-day making sure that your business operates. So have a really good think about who might be critical. Now, the reason why the legislation introduces critical workers is because there's a high number of incidents of security incidents that do actually occur because of either someone internally who may be disgruntled or potentially becomes compromised, or their credentials, so maybe their IT credentials become compromised. And most organizations have experienced something like this, particularly in the financial space, where more and more threat actors are trying to impersonate key personnel to try and get access to financial systems. So the legislation requires you to identify who these critical workers are, and then think about what additional controls you may need to have in place to be managing critical workers. Now, that may be requiring them to have additional credentials when they log on to IT systems. It might be requiring them to go through periodic checks of that they continue to be capable in their role and maintain their credentials. And another one, which is really key for this, is making sure that then you do the right background checks or the right security checks or cultural checks, either when you're employing them and or on an ongoing basis as you keep them employed, which is a really good segue, and why I've joined up with Avvanz to do this presentation, is because they can help you with all of these background checks, security checks, any of these continual checks on people. So Kanan, over to you.
Helen, I think before I start off, the critical worker can be quite a tricky definition, right? Because recently I have a large telco client who were trying to do a critical worker categorization, and ended up 91% of the workforce was somehow classified as critical, right? Either they have access to ID infrastructure, or they have interactions with clients, contractors. So it's a bit difficult. And if you're going to classify such a large portion of the population as critical, then it's not going to be an easy mitigation exercise. So how do you recommend? Is there like a reference a metrics to look at for categorization, or is it really very company and industry specific?
Yeah, look, great question, and all of my clients struggle with the same thing. It's there's no pro forma that yet. I'm sure there will, as the legislation gets a bit older. I'm sure this will start to be fleshed out more. But I guess the key thing that I bring my clients back to is thinking about it not so much as whether it's critical for your organization, but is it critical to kind of Australia and the function that you're performing for the general public? Because ultimately, the reason why we've got this legislation is really to keep that function operating for the general public. So even though it might be important to your organization, and that should be a consideration for you, if you've found that you're kind of saying everyone's critical, then maybe bring it back to, okay, what are the actual things that are going to stop you performing that function for the public? And that, you know, back to the point behind the legislation. The other thing is, obviously, I mean, people like myself can help with that, but also Department of Home Affairs, the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, all of these organisations that have been set up to help organisations deal with this, have a lot of really good guidance material and have a lot of people that can help with some of that as well. And so you may be able to reach out to them to see what other similar organisations are, how other organisations are tackling this. But I'd say bring it back to the foundations of what is that you're trying to provide to the public.
Right. And you also talked about contractors and all that. So when we engage a company to do a certain part of the work, it could be an outsourced contractor or a call center or shared services or even a landscaping company, right? So how do we need to do a certain kind of due diligence on these companies as well, other than just on the critical workers?
Yes, you do. So part of the requirement for the critical infrastructure risk management program is to look at your whole supply chain. So not just those contractors, but also who you're providing your services to. So things like if you're providing electricity to a hospital, they're a critical aspect of this, and you need to consider the risks associated with that. But as you say, look at your supply chain and any contractors you have there and see if any of those components are critical, or to your point, they might also have access to your systems. So a lot of companies outsource part of their IT or OT management. And so if you are outsourcing that function and it's critical to your overall kind of service that you're providing, then yes, you do need to do due diligence on other people who might be in that supply chain who might be critical. And a really good examples are people with admin rights. So if they can change the set points or the hold points of your assets or your infrastructure, or have access to change or to modify or anything key information, which might be like really sensitive customer information or those sorts of things, then absolutely those people will be critical workers as well.
Yeah, and as you're saying it, I think a lot of the actual case examples are running through my head, whereby it's not just in our part of the world, right? It's also in the Americas and EMEA, where actual sort of data privacy violations were happened because of the people who are not completely vetted, especially those with admin access rights and all that, right? Thanks for that. I think that brings me over to my portion. So again, I'm Kanan. Please do use the chat button to put up your questions or comments. You have also a Q&A button as well. So very quickly, just to let you know how do we sort of, where do we come in with Helen is really on the screening portion, which is where I'm going to be focusing on. So we are very heavily tech enabled, and we use technology for individual level checking as well as company level checking as well. So how do we do it? How can you do it cost effectively, quickly, in a compliant way, so that you can actually get through this exercise? Because SOCI is, yes, it is quite specific to Australia, but if you think about it, a lot of the countries also have their own SOCI equivalent, and this is the best practice anyway to have, right? And in our experience of serving more than 2,500 clients now, actually, we have seen cases of things happen first, and then they bring us, Helen's organization in to help them. Or they learn from what has happened to their competitors or other companies in the industry, and then they try to have this. It's like buying an insurance, right? Having a complete vetting process in place, whether it's an individual level background checks or a company level due diligence. And I think where Avvanz comes in quite unique is out there in the market, you see either a background checking company or a company due diligence company, right? In our case, we sort of marry together. So we give a holistic solution offering both background checks and company due diligence. So like what I say, is no longer a matter of who commits fraud, is how fast you can quickly detect it. It's just like a head of cybersecurity guy I was talking to in a bank last week said that he every day assumes that I'm going to be hacked. So he wakes up every day and tells himself, you know what, today I might get hacked. So only then you will always be prepared, right? And expect the unexpected. And I think the segment of KPMG study shows that the number one business risk is actually the people risk to any kind of business, which is why we need to make sure we really know who we hire, because you do not know what you don't know. So the Screen Mover platform, it's in fact it's a holy grail. It's won us a lot of awards. It actually helps you to do individual level background checks on anyone from any part of the world. So that individual could have studied in Asia, working in the US, lived in Middle East. It doesn't matter. We cover 150 plus countries, and we can do the checks on them. And what's the risk of not doing, right? I think these are some of the famous examples, like the Myers example. I think you might know about it. It was from Australia, Yahoo, Samsung. He actually had fake credentials, and then you have people faking qualifications to get jobs at 38 firms. This gentleman on the left-hand side. So we have, in our experience, close to 8 years now, across our clientele, we've seen that out of every 10 profiles, about 3 to 4 post some form of discrepancies, right? So it could be reputational damage. It could be sort of faking credentials. It could be inflated employment experience. It could be undeclared criminal background or financial bankruptcy background. Or it could be even sort of disturbing social media footprint, right? So there's a whole list of things you can do to really know who you hire, right? And of course, you should also try to do it yourself. But of course, the advantage of outsourcing it is Every country got its own data privacy compliance requirements. So for you even to get a simple thing done like a signed letter of consent from an individual, you got to make sure that it sort of abides with that particular country's regulatory framework, which is why it's quite tricky, right? And again, hiring is seasonal. You might hire more people in certain months. Does that mean you got to hire a bigger background screening team, right? And the sheer complexity of today's employee workforce, we have a multi-generational workforce, right? From boomers all the way to millennials and now to the Gen Z. And you're talking about people who have studied, worked, and lived in multiple countries. So are you going to stay up late night, do a verification check with an education institution the candidate studied in, and that sits in another continent, right? So there's a lot of complexities, which is why companies like Avvanz will be able to help. And we have actually shown that just looking at the cost of fraud that you can avoid and the cost of retention, or rather cost of rehiring, put all that together, your returns of investment can be more than 100%. So why us? Obviously, we're automated. There's a fast response time. There are 20 different types of checks. We can integrate with the HRMS, ATS. There's identity verification technology available as well, ISO compliance, fast turnaround time, and really using technologies like blockchain for immediate vetting and compliance to your specific data privacy laws. Very importantly, because of unlimited attempts, it gives you very low unable to verify. I think a lot of our clients have said that our previous provider used to have 4 to 6 attempts, and that's about it with the previous employer or an educational source. And when there's no replies within the 4 to 6, they put us unable to verify. That's not going to be in line with what Helen is talking about, right? We really have to thoroughly vet people. So what are the kind of checks that you can do? I like to put it in 2 segments. One is a security check, like a criminal check, civil, KYC, AML, like a money laundering, political exposure, drug trafficking, sexual offenses goes under global sanction. Then you go to adverse media, social media, for example. It could be your Twitter, which is X, Facebook or Meta. It could be your LinkedIn or in Google even, to look for derogatory indicators. It could be radicalism, sexual stuff, demonstration of worker intolerance. And these are the kind of people, if it's a critical worker, just imagine the repercussions, right? And it could be finance-related checks, identity, especially now. I think recently there's been a lot of press on really verifying authenticity of people before they're even onboarded. During COVID, a lot of remote onboarding was done, and there are a lot of cases, you can Google it up and read for yourself in the press, where the guy who onboarded was actually not the same guy who was interviewed or whose CV was presented. So this is a problem of now onboarding people from all over the country, right? So the remote onboarding makes it more important to actually do a real identity verification using digital identity. So in the UK, we have a platform called OneID to verify. In the US, we have ID Partner. In Asia, we have different platforms as well. In Singapore, for example, you have SynPass. So all these integrations will allow you to make sure that you really know who you hire and that person is the one joining your company, right? So we got to continuously up the game, right? And then your integrity checks, you have your employment, education. In some jurisdictions, even before a work pass is being issued, you have to have your education checks done, right? And you even need to verify whether that school is real or is it a degree or diploma mill. There's a lot of fake schools out there as well. So it's a bit like your Catch Me If You Can movie or Inventing Anna in Netflix, right? Whereby it's a constant chase, and if you don't up your game, the critical worker can also become very sophisticated in lying, right, just to get a job. So we talked about the individual checks, and then I asked earlier, Helen, the question of using companies as well, because they're also critical components in your SOC, right? So it could be a potential business partners, vendors, subcontractors, customers, channel partners, distributors especially. Actually, Helen, I have a question. So in this list of kind of companies who come in, right, in your SOC, who actually needs to be covered? I mean, who you really need to watch out for in the SOC?
Look, it really depends on the infrastructure that we're talking about. I guess, in short, kind of everybody, but back to the previous conversation, not everybody in every organization needs to be checked. But most organizations have started doing this for boards and sometimes for their exec. Some of them are starting to, certainly the financial industry, because of KYC and because of their ASIC requirements, have got better at doing this. But there's a lot of industries that are still quite far behind. They've also only thought of doing police checks. Most organizations have sort of started thinking about doing police checks, and then they do a background check, but usually the background check is just checking referees. So it's not sort of independent verification, it's whoever somebody has suggested can help them. And I guess this sort of putting a question back to you, in Australia, we have a skills shortage in a lot of these like critical areas. So, you know, usually they're highly educated, highly trained personnel or highly competent personnel that we're talking about. And so there's not many of those people around in the workforce with this skills shortage. And I've got a lot of clients who they look at this list that you've sort of given of things that they should check, and they think, yes, we should check all of those things, but they're scared that if they do all of these checks, then they might find an adverse result. And then what do they do with that? And I know you sort of touched on it before of where things go wrong and the reputational damage and potentially the damage to the organization if you hire the wrong person. But maybe you can share how you're helping organizations, I guess, traverse this. What do you do if something comes back negative?
Yeah. And by the way, it's not just reputation damage. It could be we've seen cases whereby shareholder value has dropped, and and even employee morale. How people feel if they realize that a lot of their colleagues were not of the right background. But again, it's all about building a discrepancy matrix, because for different industries, their tolerance is different. I would say among all the industry, we serve like more than 20, 30 different kind of industries. It could be education, tech, banks, it could be mining companies. Of course, certain regulated industries like the banks have very, very little tolerance. Even if the educational background, let's say there's a plus minus few months, they're not very happy. If it's an employment plus minus 1 month, the employee could have padded the job employment with the previous and the post, and make it look like he was continuously employed. And they have very little tolerance. But we have also other sectors whereby they're able to accept even up to like plus minus 3 months, because they know that during COVID a lot of people were laid off. But it's not about they're not actually, there's no bias towards employees who had a break in their career. It's about integrity, right? Whether they did declare it or not. That's all they're looking for. And you really got to build a sort of a tolerance matrix or discrepancy matrix based on the industry, based on the compliance requirements of the industry and of the company as well. So if I have a red flag for a particular check could be a red flag for company A, but it could be an amber for company B, and they could sort of adjudicate and decide to put it to a green and take the person. And we're not just talking about doing background checks on new joiners. We're talking about existing people as well. A lot of companies do every 12-monthly check, because, like what I said earlier, the highest frauds actually coming from your existing employees more than your new joiners, right? So it's about, if you're worried that you're going to get adverse findings and I'm not going to do any checks at all, I think that's, I think the consequential damages is very, very clear. But I think what we can do is adjust it such a way that I adjust the tolerance level. Like about 10 years ago, I think people holding alcohol in their hand and putting up social media posts was a bit of a no-no. Now I think even I have some social media posts like that, so I think it's no big deal. But if somebody has a weapon and they talk about weapon, like even recently there's a social media post. It came out one of our clients, and my clients was quite disturbed. It's a UK company, and they said, "Your Singaporean guy is talking about M16." I said that in Singapore, it's mandatory for all of us to serve national service. To talk about M16 is not so sensitive. But if a guy in another country, in fact, we had a very similar post of a guy in I think it was in Eastern Europe talking about it, it became an issue, right? So they had a conversation with the candidate. So it really depends on the countries, which is where I guess our knowledge base comes in, right? Sorry, you're going to say something.
And I think the usefulness of the legislation in Australia, the SOCI legislation, by being risk-based, it allows you then to develop that risk picture and then understand what's important to your organization and what are the things that you should be looking for your organization. And then with the use of your functions, being able to piece together the key components that are important to you and then understand more about who you're hiring. Because I agree with you, burying your head in the sand doesn't make a problem go away. But if you're more informed about who it is that you're hiring, then you know what you're prepared to accept or not prepared to accept. Can I ask another question on around the skills shortage? So another problem that a lot of my clients have is that their recruitment process already takes a certain amount of time, and then their concern is that if you're adding additional checks onto it, it's going to take even more time. How do you help your clients with that as well?
This time we're going to talk about turnaround time. That's his pet topic.
Yes, it is. I get queries almost on an hourly basis on turnaround. Yeah, that's an excellent question. I I guess for a lot of our clients, it's it's balancing risk and benefit, right? Um, it all depends on the type of checks that you need to be run, right? We have the ability because we're HR technology driven to run a check and have it returned with a result within one business day. However, if you get into the more manual checks like your education or, for example, employment checks, whereby it takes the interview process and it takes availability on the other party to set up, an appropriate time to spend time with them, then that can get a little bit more drawn out. So essentially, if, for example, one of our more popular checks is social media checks, right? That's becoming really big for us. We've got a lot of banks actually putting that up as a mandatory check amongst all the other employment reference and the financial check that they run, right? And that reveals a whole lot about the risk level of the person. Again, it's very aligned towards the position that the person is taking. Like I recently got a query from a bank who has a brokering arm, a trading arm, right? And we did a social media screen on the broker that they were hoping to hire up. And let's just say that his social media posts were not exactly child friendly. Filled nothing sexual or anything like that, but filled with a lot of derogatory terms and so on and so forth. And we flagged it, right? And the bank came back to us and said, hey, look, in that industry, it's perfectly normal for these guys to be cursing their lungs out, right? That's what they do on a daily basis. So again, to Kanan's point, it really depends on the type of roles and the industry that we are serving.
And the cultural fit, I guess, too, that if you're trying to move your organization in a particular direction, then what might be acceptable in certain industries may not be the direction that you're trying to take your organization.
Absolutely, absolutely. So again, what I tell most of my clients is that we are not an investigation organization. We just provide the data and we leave it to you to kind of make the assessment as to what's acceptable to you according to your governance and your requirements, right? I guess that I'm going in a roundabout manner, but again, it all depends on what you're after, right? Essentially, for us, we can turn around checks within one business day or even less than a business day. However, there are some checks which need a little bit more digging into, and that can take anywhere up from 5 to 10 to 15 business days.
So we're still on clients. The average turnaround time is 0 to 10 days, roughly. Yeah.
I think the key message is that you can get really good support to push these things through quite quickly and get a lot of additional information that you may not have thought of or you may not be able to access or easily access. And all of this is around then building a much better picture to make sure that you're hiring the right person.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Talking about the company, I wanted to finish up that portion as well. I think we talked about the different kinds of companies and like what Siang says, cost benefit risk balance, right? And in terms of companies, what kind of checks you can do? You can do a financial DD, a legal DD on them as well. If there have been any civil lawsuits, for any negative media coverage on them, operational DD, market DD, and also a due diligence for the management organization. ESG now is a big thing, as you know. And then, of course, if you're partnering with the company, synergy integration, overall supply DD. So we actually have a CDD Global, a company due diligence global online platform where you can go in and you can see the different types of packages. You've got a basic KYB, KYC, you've got a premium type, you've got a very comprehensive one. So you can really look at the description and see which is the best fit for you. And based on that, you can do the DD. In fact, we've even recently introduced a social media screening check for merchants on e-commerce stores like Amazon and all that. Because not all the time you have a company selling products, but there have been a lot of cases whereby people bought products and then it was scammed. The money was sent out, but the goods never came. And they're not a registered organizations. It could be from a home, a cupcake shop, right? For all you know. So how do we really know these guys are reliable merchants for you? Which is why we've introduced that as well. And we're going to be, and there's another product we're going to be introducing in a couple of weeks in partnership with MasterCard. Sort of a cyber-related due diligence also. So you know what, this is could be. It's never enough. I think Helen, you also know, it's never 100%. And even SOCI X sort of stipulate you got to do all these checks, but you and I know it's never 100%. But even if you're 80 or 90% already there, I think that's a good risk mitigation already.
Yeah, and I mean, it really is around managing your risk and it kind of coming back to your supply chains. If you understand who is critical in your supply chain, then you can look at the sorts of things or situations where they wouldn't be able to supply to you. And one of the key ones that I'm seeing pop up more and more is around modern slavery. And so where you're talking about environmental and sustainability, then if they've identified modern slavery practices in their supply chains, then even though they may be technically still able to supply you something, then all of a sudden you're not supposed to be using them, or you need to find a new supplier because they've got modern slavery practices, and we need to eliminate those practices from our supply chains. So it's not just through the sort of the straightforward security of critical infrastructure. It's also around consequential, I guess, consequential activities that may then mean that you can no longer use them, or you need to look for alternate suppliers.
Well, let's see if there's any questions to take. I know there were some questions people put out during the registration process. Maybe Helen, you want to go through yours if there's anything from your side?
I'm afraid I can't see them at the moment, so you may have to help me out.
Okay, I think the earlier questions were in terms of timelines for SOCI. So what are the timelines? The timelines already, if you already missed it, what is a grace period? How do I go about doing it? Will I be in trouble? Will I be penalized if I don't get it done? I think that's what you want to know.
Sure. So the critical infrastructure risk management program rule came in February this year, and then you had 6 months to implement your critical infrastructure risk management program. That's the deadline that we're just talking about that has just been, and that was the 17th, 18th of August. Now you've got another 6 months to implement management of critical workers. So under the risk assessment, obviously most organisations have then identified what are critical workers, have identified if they've got gaps and things. And so the expectation is that over the next year, you'll implement or you'll fill any of the gaps from the risk assessment actions that you've identified. So the next drop dead date is August next year, which is to have a cyber security program in place. So having addressed one of those cyber standards, that's the next date. And then in September next year, the board needs to report on the management of your security of critical infrastructure. So I guess that the short answer is you've still got another year to make sure this is all implemented and working effectively. And there's guidance around there's guidance available from the Australian Cyber Security Centre, which echoes this, that they say that they don't expect that you're managing these risks straight away. So in terms of being penalised, I can't talk to the legal aspects of what might happen if you have an incident and you're found to not be compliant. But I can certainly say that the expectation is that if you haven't got it now, start to take those steps and get that in place before your board needs to report on it in September next year.
Basically, the good recommendation would be quickly start. Don't wait till the last minute.
Exactly. You're already a bit too late, but it's not the end of the world. And your chances of being penalised they're taking an engaged approach with industry. So don't see that, oh, it's all over and therefore I'm not going to do anything. Just start and get it in place and yeah, make sure absolutely that you've got all of this in place then by September next year when your board needs to report on it.
Right. I think one of the questions that came up was to do with certification. Is the Australian government looking at, issuing like a seal of approval or certification that they are, a particular organization is SOCI accredited or certified?
Yeah, so at this stage, no, it's self-regulated. So again, not that I'm condoning people to not be compliant, but it is self-regulated. So no one else is necessarily going to know until you potentially have an incident. It's for those who are very familiar with Australian safety legislation, it is similar to safety legislation that it's reliant on the company and the individuals to make sure that you're compliant at this point. Now, that's not to say that in the future they may start requiring you to get external audits and provide more evidence that you're compliant and may have a different sort of regulatory regime. But at this stage and for the foreseeable future, it is self-regulated. However, I kind of draw you back to the fact that boards and or owners are the ones that are going to need to report on this in September, and you will find that most boards and owners of organizations are not prepared to report unless they've got a fair amount of due diligence that's been done. So that's I guess self-regulation in Australia.
The one question that came up was what kind of checks do we need to do for critical workers? So like what I explained earlier, it really depends on your industry and your company's compliance requirements. But what we could do is we could actually help you craft a sort of a matrix of checks based on the different critical workers risk level, right? So obviously a high risk level will have more checks and more number of years of coverage as well. For example, it could be a last 10 years of criminal background, compared to a lower risk level person could be maybe last 3 to 5 years, right? So we could actually adjust the time period. Again, like what I said earlier, cost is always there, but you also got to balance with the benefit and the security of it, right? The risk of it. So we can definitely help you build a matrix, and we will also take into account the industry you're in, the regulatory framework you are in, the country you're in, because they're also country-related regulatory requirements also to consider. So it can be quite complex, but we will definitely demystify and decode it and sort of build that table for you.
And that's a good, we didn't really touch on it, but being risk-based, the legislation does say that you need to manage those risks as far as reasonably practicable, which is slightly different to a safety requirement, but has similar intent, but just not to the level of rigor that we expect for safety. And there is actually definition around what that is. But to your point, which you just raised, that there is an allowance for a cost-benefit analysis in there as well to see then, whether the benefits outweigh the cost.
Sure. Any other questions in the chat or the Q&A? Maybe we can give half a minute to bring up anything at all. I think it's better to ask questions and really know how to go about doing this than be unsure of this exercise. So please feel free to type it out in the chat or Q&A. If not, what we could also do is when you send in the recording of the webinar with some notes and some information back, you can actually come back to us with any questions or even a one-on-one session that we can help you with. Of course, myself or Siang or Helen would be more than happy to help you guys out. All right, I think with that, I'm done. Helen, if any concluding, Helen, Siang, you guys got to add anything before we end the webinar?
I guess just encouraging people to be not scared or overwhelmed by the legislation. There's people here that can help you with it. And ultimately, it is about building resilience in your organisation and in infrastructure in Australia. So see it as a good thing, see it as an opportunity to check your organisation, reset, and look for any of those areas where there's just opportunities for improvement. It's not necessarily that you've been doing something wrong.
Yeah, you have anything to add?
No, I'm good. Thanks.
All right, awesome. Sounds good. Thanks, Helen, for partnering Avvanz in this very, very informative webinar. I'm sure our attendees will find this useful, and I'm sure they know who to go to when they have questions as well. Have a great week ahead, and fantastic. Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.